Hello everyone and welcome to Singularity One-on-One. Singularity One-on-One is a feature of Singularity weblog where you can go and listen to it or download it in full. As you may already know, my name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and as always I will be the man with the questions. Today I'm privileged to have Andrew Crofts as my guest with the answers. According to the Daily Telegraph, Andrew Crofts is the king of British ghostwriters, and he has ghosted a staggering amount of books and spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of ghostwriting and what it takes to find another person's voice, a one-man word factory. But in addition to that, Andrew has published probably over 80 books for over 40 years as an author and ghostwriter, many of which have become international #1 bestsellers. His subject matters and co-authors have ranged from billionaires to bonded laborers, reality television stars to the rulers of medium-sized companies and countries, rock stars to bad girls. He is also a travel writer, a business writer, and a published novelist. So, without further ado, let me welcome Andrew Crofts to our show. It is very great to have you here today, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Nicola.
So, Andrew, I will not waste any time and would like to jump straight into our interview with the first question, which is usually the same one of all my interviewees, and it is, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you get to become, first maybe interested in writing and then eventually you became a writer yourself?
Well, I was interested from the day I left school, which was when I was about 17, and I wanted to be a writer, partly because I wanted to be freelance, and I wanted a profession where I could follow my own interests and not have to turn up at an office and do what other people wanted. And if something caught my attention, I wanted to be able to go off and do it, and then spend time on my own writing writing about it. So I started out just getting any sort of writing work I could. So initially it was articles, and I would do business writing, and I would do absolutely anything I could. But all the time I was trying to sell books as well. But it takes a long time to get publishers to accept that you are able to produce an entire book. So I suppose it was probably about 10 years, I was probably in my 20s, before I started to get commissions from publishers. And then it was a little bit after that I discovered the art of ghostwriting, or the craft, perhaps, of ghostwriting, which makes life a lot easier in many ways, because it means you get all the subject matter brought to you in one person. You don't have to do huge amounts of research. And it also means that you don't have to do the promotion of the book in the same way. Once you've written it and you've exhausted your curiosity on the subject, you can move on to the next project. But at the same time, there were still certain projects like this one with James Martin, which I've just done, where I actually wanted to write the book anyway under my own steam, so to speak. So it was written objectively in my name, in my words, and in my name, rather than being in his words, as quite a lot of my books are. They're written in the...
I will get back to your book because that's the main reason why we are here today. But I would still like to dig a little deeper and ask you this question. So in the end of the day, do you consider yourself to be a writer or a ghostwriter?
I am a writer who makes most of his living from ghostwriting. Most writers will ghostwrite if you catch them at the right moment, and which means if they're interested in the subject and if they haven't got anything else on and they're hungry. But they don't necessarily set their stall out, as I have for many years, to say, if you've got an interesting story, bring it to me, and you're not able to write it yourself for whatever reason, you don't have the time or the ability or the inclination, bring it to me and I will produce for you the book that you would write if you had the time and the skill. So I am a writer, but ghostwriting is what I'm best known as in England, certainly that's what I'm best known for.
And it's very appropriate then to move on to the subject of your latest book, titled The Change Agent, How to Create a Wonderful World, which I have right here with me, and which I just finished reading last night and enjoyed immensely. But perhaps it's best to let you tell our viewers and listeners what this book is all about and how you came up to writing it.
Well, I first met James Martin about 20 years ago when I was commissioned by McGraw-Hill to write a book about a business which was called the James Martin Associates at that time. And he was very, very successful at that time as a technology guru. He worked at IBM in the 60s, and he then got off and become an independent guru on technology and predictions of the future. He predicted the internet. He predicted all sorts of things that have come true. And then there was, and then I sort of lost touch with him. And then just recently, I heard that he had just donated $100 million of his own money to Oxford University, which made him the biggest ever donor to a private donor to a British university. To start a school of the future, a school studying all the big subjects of the 21st century, because he'd written a book called The Meaning of the 21st Century, which looked at all the major threats to mankind at the moment, which is obviously global warming, shortage of water, population, future cities, and all the things that worry us. And he wanted to set up a school which would bring together all the people at Oxford who think about these things, from the Alzheimer's problem to pandemics to the new fuel sources, all these things, and try to get some ideas on how the future is likely to pan out. And I was intrigued to see that I knew he was very successful when I met him 20 years ago, but I hadn't realised, as he was an independent, a freelance professor basically, that he had been so successful he could afford to give away $100 million. And so I got back in touch with him. And he was very pleased to hear from me because he thought I should write a book on the subject. He said that, there was a lot to be said. And he said, I bought an island in Bermuda, a private island in Bermuda. Why don't you come up there and we can talk about it more seriously? So suddenly the project got even more interesting and tempting. Anybody who has a private island is always catches my attention. And the island was absolutely fascinating. He's created this little kingdom there, a sort of ecological experiment in some ways. He's built an extraordinary house. He's also discovered under the island, he thought he bought a big lump of rock, basically covered in vegetation. And when he started hacking back the vegetation, he found that under the rocks there were hidden catacombs, which nobody seemed to have know anything about. And when they cleared them all out, they realised what they must be is ammunition stores built by the English during the War for Independence. And of course they obviously never told anybody they'd got them there. And they're like railway arches. These are gigantic structures. So he, as well as building this wonderful fantasy house and garden on the top, the island's about 8 acres. He also developed this wonderful subterranean world underneath the island as well. And in fact, when Rudy Giuliani was running for president, or was thinking of running for president, and wanted to do some fundraising in Bermuda, he actually asked Jim if he could borrow, because he didn't want everybody else to know that he was there, to borrow these tunnels under the island. So he brought about 40 billionaires into one of these tunnels for dinner and put up a French kitchen in another one, and nobody knew he'd ever been there. The whole thing happened underneath the island. So it was the story was many layered. It was, first of all, it was the looking at the future and the school that he set up at Oxford, and the whole Singularity connection. Then there was the looking at Jim's own personal biography, because he was he'd come from a poor family in the Midlands. He'd won a scholarship from his grammar school to Oxford in the 30s, I guess, or 40s, and had got it was after the war, would be the 40s, and had gone on to create this enormous fortune as well. So there was a story, there was the personal story, and then there was the story of this island as well, and the discovery of it. And I wrote it in the form of part of it as a straight biography, and part of it in the form of a conversation between him and me, so that he could explain to me all the ideas that he has, which are behind the founding of the school in Oxford, which is called the Oxford Martin School. So that is how the book.
So in that case, it seems the almost like unbelievable description of the island and the surroundings of it are actually factually accurate.
Oh, everything is accurate. And in fact, a journalist from The Independent who read the book decided he wanted to have a look as well. And he went out and had almost exactly the same experience of being completely
I would like to
bewitched
have a
by the
look as
science.
well, too.
Yes. I mean, and Jim is always very happy James Martin is always very happy to have guests come out and visit him there, because he just loves talking about his pet subjects and showing people around his island. It's a bit like Citizen Kane in his castle in California.
So in that sense, would you call your book to be non-fiction or fiction?
Oh, it's totally non-fiction. It's
Totally
totally
non-fiction.
fiction. Yes, it's absolutely true. I mean, it's written in the form of half of it is my visit to the island and the conversations with Jim, and half of it is looking back from his birth through his time at IBM, how he came to come out of IBM, how he came to start to build this fortune that is, because he's gone on to give even more money to Oxford. Now, I think in total he's now given $150 million, and he's also brought in other people like Bill Gates and George Soros, and I believe they've also contributed now in matching funds. So it's grown into a considerable venture at Oxford.
Andrew, there seem to be two parallel narratives, it seems to me, that are unfolding together simultaneously throughout the book. One telling the story of Andrew Crofts as a guest on this mysterious island owned by James Martin, and the other one telling the story of a young boy from a poor English family who was born shortly before World War II. Are both of those stories told by Andrew Crofts? Or is it just your story told by Andrew Crofts and James Martin's story told by himself?
Well, it was his story as he told it to me. He had, when I first met him 20 years ago, quite a lot of the material I knew already from I'd been out, he didn't have the island then, he lived in a place 20 years ago, he lived in a place called Tuckerstown in Bermuda, which is where a lot of the wealthy live. And we spent some time talking at that stage about his background and about his personal story. So I already knew quite a bit about that. But it's as he told the story to me, I've relayed it in my own words in the book. But you're right, yeah, there are two. It's very distinctly divided into two narratives.
Yeah.
Two narrative stories. So anybody who is particularly interested in the making of the man, but less interested in what he's got to say now, can easily distinguish. You can pick out the bits quite easily that will interest you. And likewise, if you're interested in his ideas.
I found that literary tool quite useful and quite sort of engaging, to going back and forth in time and sort of the present and the past, and tracing the path from the past into the present, but yet focused entirely on to the future. I found that fascinating, and I love that.
Well, it could be quite a dry subject otherwise. I mean, if we just talked about his ideas, or we just followed his career, I thought it could make quite a long and heavy read, and I thought this would break it up and make it an easier and more easily digested read. That was the hope, so that's good.
So let me ask you this. Now that you've written and published the book, which I recommend everyone read, and of course I'm going to post links to it after our interview is over, but what would be the goal, the ultimate goal that you would like to accomplish with the book, now that it's finished?
Well, I think James should be much better known and treated for his enormous achievement. I mean, to be the biggest ever donor to an English university is an extraordinary achievement for somebody, especially somebody who has basically made his fortune single-handed. It's not as if he's had a mighty company to sell or anything like that. It's all been done with his lectures, his books, his videos, and his teachings. I don't think he receives nearly enough credit for the accuracy of the predictions he's done in the past. I mean, he was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for one of his books, which is of course a huge honour. But the man in the street, I don't think knows as much about him as he should. I think he should be much better known. But I think also many of his messages should be much better known. I think he has so many. He had his position because of the school is that he gets to know and talk to an enormous number of extraordinarily clever experts in a lot of different subjects and bring them together. And each of these people are specialists in their own area. But Jim has an enormous capacity for grasping the big picture and making some very startling predictions about the future and about what young people today could and should be doing in the hope of basically saving the planet. His big dream is, or his big picture, is that we're at this cusp in time. The 21st century is going to be the century where we either create the greatest, because of the singularity and because of technology, the greatest civilization ever, sort of a gigantic renaissance, or we could, if we get it wrong, completely mess it up and maybe even destroy Homo sapiens completely and go, plunge ourselves back into the dark ages. And he puts a very, very succinct case. He's very, very good at explaining why he thinks this will happen. He can't be absolutely sure which of these things is going to happen because it depends on what choices we all make. And he's a man in his 70s, so he's not going to be around to see himself. But he has this theory that if he could choose any time to be alive in history, he says he would like to be young today because he thinks this is the most exciting time in the history of mankind and that we could see the most colossal developments over the next few years, which you know a great deal about because of the singularity. And if it all works as it is hoped it will work, it could bring a whole golden age of mankind. And I just think he just is very encouraging. In a time when most people are full of doom and gloom about what we're doing to the planet and the climate and to ourselves and the future and the huge gap that's developed between the rich and the poor, he has an awful lot of potentially positive messages to put across as to how this could actually be for our own good, not to our detriment.
Let me dive into the meat of the matter here and ask you this. Were you ever aware of the concept of the technological singularity before that sort of hilarious moment in the book where James Martin sort of pops out the concept right out of nowhere, it seems almost?
I was completely ignorant, and he sort of said that, yes, he mentioned the singularity, as you say, I had to make an instant decision. Should I own up immediately that I hadn't a clue what he was talking about and get him to explain it, or should I try to a bit like a child in a class, or should I bluff it out? And luckily, I had the courage to say quickly, I haven't a clue. And he explained, and of course, I knew a lot of the elements. I hadn't heard the term singularity at that stage. This was a couple of years ago, or 18 months, 2 years ago, when I was doing the interviews, and it was I hadn't heard of Ray Kurzweil and things like this, and so it sent me off to do a lot of research in all sorts of areas, and I found there was an awful lot of other material going on. But yes, it was it was news to me, and a wonderful concept. It helped me to understand a lot of what James was talking about, because it brings so many subjects together in one place.
Actually, I would sort of use this moment to just read a couple of paragraphs of your book because I think they're just great. So. The thing that people need to understand, Jim said after a while, is that the singularity will become a reality in the coming years. I'm sorry, I had a horrible feeling I might have missed something, like those times at school when you would discover you had daydreamed through some vital bit of the teacher's explanation, that you had left it too late to ask, and that nothing was going to make sense from now on. What is the singularity exactly? And then Jim's answer is, it is a break in human evolution that will be caused by the staggering speed of technological evolution. I think actually myself that's one of the best definitions perhaps out there. There's many competing definitions, each one with its unique strengths and weaknesses, but I think that's one of the better ones out there.
I think that's his skill. He is a tremendous communicator. If you ever are lucky enough to get to one of his lectures, he is very, very good at making very complex subjects interesting and relevant and understandable by anybody, even if they're not a specialist in that subject. I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think the singularity is not a terribly easy phrase to grasp. I mean, it's not
Very
obvious
hard.
at all just from that word. And in fact, I said that to Jim, and he said, well, of course, if I could think of something better, I'm sure he was sure everyone would be delighted. But no, he has yet been able to come up with anything that quite explains what it's all about. It would perhaps you on your website should run a competition for possible alternative titles for the whole event.
I have a definition page where I have listed probably 7 or 8 different versions of the definition, and I was actually thinking I would definitely add James Martin's definition there. But let me be very do the same thing that you did and confess my ignorance here, that just like you were ignorant of the concept of the singularity, I myself was actually quite ignorant of James Martin when I picked up the book and started reading it. So I had to do a little research. Then eventually I went to his website. I watched his movie, The Meaning of the 21st Century, which is, by the way, a great movie narrated by Michael Douglas, and I recommend everybody watches it. And it raises many of, if probably all of the questions that you go into detail here in your book. But so you were exposed to the concept of the singularity for the first time at that moment. So how have your perception of the concept evolved since that moment on? Can you sort of lead us through?
Well, as soon as he mentioned, of course, I went off to look it up and came across Ray Kurzweil and read everything that I could on the subject. Mm-hmm. I think it made me feel very optimistic. I think at that stage, and which is again why I think I like the idea of people listening to James and following the same path. It did make me see that there was enormous hope for the world if we can get it right. That we are about, and quite excited too, that over the next, however many, I mean it varies, doesn't it? We might say 2 years, 10 years or 50 years, but over the coming period, certainly in my children's lifetime, there are going to be the most extraordinary and exciting things happening. And we're beginning to see them already, as well as the dreadful things. And I think I felt an enormous rush of excitement at the prospect of what it could all mean and what might be, and also particularly in being in the publishing industry, which is the knowledge industry. We really should be a little bit more switched on about this. The publishing industry is not renowned for being on the cutting edge of anything at all, but it does actually look, since this Christmas, when everybody started giving each other iPads and Kindles and so forth, that we are actually beginning to grasp the fact that printing great big lumps of paper isn't necessarily the only way to move forward, and that we could be plugged into something much more exciting, something just unimaginable a few years ago, that could take human knowledge to a whole new place, and I just think the whole thing is very exciting. And Jim is very good, and it is, as you say, when you say you hadn't heard of him before, and an awful lot of people say that, and it is extraordinary to me that you can do something like found a school at Oxford in your own name, and giving these vast sums of money, and people still haven't heard of you. The man at the Independent said the same thing, and then he went away and wrote an article, five pages about his trip and everything in the Independent a week or two ago, and you can write these enormous, and there's so much media noise out there that you can have somebody of this stature, somebody who has achieved this much, and still hardly any of us have heard of him.
Yeah, and especially since I've been sort of doing research and working in the field for probably 5 or 6 years now, and to have somebody of his stature, as you said, who has published over 100 books in computer science, in all kinds of related technologies and fields, and somebody like me never heard of it. I mean, for one, it shows the limit of my knowledge, personal ignorance too. But also, I think it also has to do something with the North American and sort of European or British divide, maybe a little bit. But anyway, let me focus on your emotional response to the concept after you first heard about it, because I find that people usually have a very strong emotional response to the singularity, but it's not always positive. So quite often people are scared and or for a number of other reasons respond in a very negative, pessimistic way to the concept and to all the possibilities that could happen. So for example, people decide to focus on issues like weapons of mass destruction, biological agents modified with genetic engineering, the destructive forces of our ever-growing technological capabilities, and so on. And so Ray Kurzweil, for example, is quite often being criticized for being overtly optimistic. And it strikes me that James Martin is, I'd say, equally optimistic. So from your own perspective, why should we not be pessimists? Why should we not think that the end is near and that, either through weapons of mass destruction or through some kind of, other technological catastrophe, we can wipe the Homo sapiens out of the planet?
Well, of course we still may, but I think my generation was brought up being told that we were going to be wiped out by the Russians, and it's turned out to be a little like the Wizard of Oz. When the wall actually came down and we saw into what was going on over there, we realised actually we were never in a huge amount of danger. There was a little bit of a freeze-thaw around the Bay of Pigs, but in fact we were frightened about nothing at all. The natural human condition is, I think, to be frightened of the unknown. But we have the known to look back on. We can look back on history, and I think, to be honest, it would be a great deal more frightening to be living in medieval London when the plague struck or the fire struck, or I think when human life expectancy was 30 or 40 years, when you spent most of your life with toothache or dying in childbirth or setting light to your clothes on an open fire, and life was really very precarious indeed. And I think that actually, if we look at it, on the whole, there may be certain elements we don't like about modern life, but on the whole, it's got better and better for most people. For those it isn't better for, they are people who probably wouldn't have survived at all in the past. Our population has grown, and that is not necessarily a good thing at all for the planet. But for all the people who would have survived anyway, life is probably less painful. It is longer. It has many more compensations than it did in the past. So at any stage in history, somebody who was optimistic would probably have been right more often than somebody who was pessimistic. You will lose things along the way, and people who love live entertainment and hate television would be able to point to the fact that vaudeville has died, perhaps, or there are all sorts of things that we've lost along the way. Also, when you look back at things that people remember fondly, they're often not quite as wonderful. Even in the short term, people will talk about, everybody will remember their own time as being a golden age. So people in my age will remember television of the 60s and 70s being wonderful. When you actually watch programs from the 60s or 70s, you see they actually weren't wonderful at all. And they're really very primitive compared to what we have now. And I think that's a very flippant example. But I think that same sort of view could be put across everything. We eat better, but more people are warm and safe and are not murdered on the streets than they would have been 300-400 years ago. And also, of course, far less wars, although we still have wars, and they're a terrible thing. They are nothing compared to the horrors of the First World War and the Second World War.
Well, I think there's also another element to that optimism that you bring very well out in your book, which is actually a quote again from James Martin. And I think that quote represents what psychologists often call as embracing agency. In other words, taking responsibility for your own actions. And James Martin says here, we have to ask, what is the right thing to do, rather than constantly worrying about what is the most likely thing to happen. So in other words, to me that says, what's going to happen is perhaps out of our control, but what we can do about things is entirely within our control. How we're going to position ourselves, what kind of proactive action we are going to take to shape events on the world stage or in our personal lives is within our own agency. And therefore, based on that capability and realization, I think he's an optimist too.
I think we can see what is in our hands is we can't change the world individually, but we can change the people who can change the world. I think we're seeing in Egypt at the moment, and Tunisia before, and in all sorts of other countries. People can do enormous things by speaking up, and especially now with the technology, it's possible for the masses to get together very quickly and make their wishes known. And so I think we can be hopeful that we can get people in power who will possibly be younger, who will have better ideas about how to shape the world for the future and how to combat things like climate change, whether they believe it's man's fault or not that the planet is having problems, or that they will work out how to mitigate the problems that are being caused, how to work out new ways to power the world, because we obviously can't go on hauling oil out of the world forever. It's going to run out sooner or later, and to get clean water to the right places, enormous problem, but perfectly doable. If you think how much has already been done in the West, the fact that you do not see dead bodies in the streets, which you would have seen 500 years ago. You've got no sewage in the streets, which again 200 or 300 years ago there would have been sewage in the streets. All that has been sorted out. 100 years ago that was sorted out. So it isn't that big a jump to get to do the same all over the world. So you've got clean water to everybody in Africa, just capturing rainwater to start with. And we've seen simple things. And Bill Gates has been very active in this with the combating malaria.
His foundation, yeah.
Yes, his foundation. And if more people like him and Warren Buffett are encouraged, and people like Jim to put their money into things like this, and he's very keen to encourage other, obviously he knows a lot of other very rich people living in Bermuda as he does, trying to encourage them rather than sitting on their vast amounts of money and not doing very much, to actually, his message is actually it's great fun to start to do what he's done and what Bill Gates is doing, to have a project rather than
billionaire's pledge
growing.
I think Bill Gates calls it the billionaire's pledge, that more than half of their wealth would be given away to charity. And I think they managed to enroll, together with Warren Buffett, about 30 people so far, 30 billionaires.
I think Mark Zuckerberg as well. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, I think, is doing something similar, isn't he? I believe.
Yeah.
And also his fortunes are so, and it's nothing new. I mean, Carnegie and Rockefeller and all these people did it in the past. It is, once you're that rich, it's no great personal loss to do it. It's very and it's good for the family name. I mean, there are lots of selfish advantages as well. But these names will live forever, and Bill Gates' name certainly will live forever, I would think, now in the work he's doing.
So let me ask you this then. Going back to the agency issue, what is Andrew Crofts doing after being exposed to the concept of the technological singularity now that you weren't doing before? What has changed in you? Yes,
well, to start with, Nicola, you've got me Skyping, so there's a start. You see, you've moved me forward. I think in that I am evangelizing for James, I think, and I'm talking about it more and I'm writing about it more. I think it's made me more aware in my own small way of how to use, that I should be using technology myself, that I've got to try not to be Luddite myself. Because it's very easy. It's always a jump, isn't it? I mean, even just doing something like this, it takes a little effort to rig yourself up. It was the same when word processing first came along, and we all had to give up our typewriters. And even though we knew that this was going to be a huge advantage to us, it takes a while to do that. So I think I would like to think it's going to make me grasp the future a little faster. Hopefully, be a little less scared and full of trepidation when things come along, and also I shall evangelize as loudly and as often as I possibly can about James, because there is a selfish element because I want to promote the book, obviously, as well. But I do think that James's message should be much more widely known, as the man himself should be much more widely known.
So basically, you're pushing forward the message that he puts here in the book, where he says, we have to find a way of making the world understand what is at stake here. Young people need to know that it isn't all gloom and doom. On the contrary, it's the most exciting time in history to be young.
I think absolutely, definitely, because I think that there's so much doom and gloom shoved at young people, and this is a difficult time. But then it's always difficult to be young and to be making your way in the world. It's never easy. You don't come sailing straight out of school or university and you're suddenly doing exactly what you want to do. It's always a struggle. But I think that they're particularly constantly being told, the young generation at the moment, that they're dreaming too much, they're not going to get what they want, and the world isn't what it was when their parents were young, and the money's running out, and the baby boomers have had all the best of everything, and we've messed up the world for them. And there's an element of truth in all these things, of course, but in the final analysis, this is a fantastic time for them, because technology gives them the ability to do stuff that someone of my age, and certainly someone of James's age, could never do when they were young. Our world was as far away as the Stone Age compared to what young people can do today. They have so much of their time freed up by technology. They have so much ability to travel, ability to understand. All that knowledge is at their fingertips, whereas we had to research endlessly in very archaic and time-consuming ways. It's all there on their keyboards. Everything, the whole world is in Wikipedia and such like, and that's just such a fantastic advantage to anybody.
I agree entirely. I agree entirely with you, and I also embrace the similar kind of optimism. And yet, there must be one thing which makes you be more optimistic than everything else. Just like there must be at least one thing that really makes you fearful and makes you remain unable to exclude entirely the possibility that we may make the biggest mistake and sort of wipe ourselves out or bring us back to the dark ages. So what would be those two things? The one that inspires you the most and the one that you're the most fearful about?
I think the one that inspires me is what I was just talking about the knowledge, the fact that it's all there and it'll become more and more organised and more accessible. That is definitely the thing I think to feel most optimistic about, because once you've got the knowledge, you can do anything. Knowledge is the key. I think the thing to be most fearful about is probably the gap between the rich and the poor, and I don't just mean individuals. I think that's not brilliant to have. Everyone uses the bank as an example, but they're not the only people. We all know that the inequality is getting worse and worse, but the inequality between countries and continents. And I think because everything is conspiring against Africa, isn't it? At the moment, the climate is conspiring, the politics, the economics. It's a very tough struggle down there. And although again there are a lot of very optimistic signs down there, and there are certain countries like Uganda where there's a lot of positive stuff as well as negative stuff. But ultimately, as it gets hotter and hotter, it's going to get harder and harder for them to farm the land, and things are going to get more and more difficult. So I think probably, although I can feel very optimistic about people who are already quite well off in the Western world, I think I would be fearful for some of the people who are already at the bottom of the pile, that it's going to get worse before it gets better for them.
Okay, Andrew, I think we're coming back towards the end of our interview here, and I would like to ask you the one thing that you would like for our listeners to take away from this podcast interview today with you. What if you had one message to give us, what would that be?
I think I would like them to find out more about James. I would like them, as you did, to have a look at his film online, because I think that's extremely interesting, and to look into what he's doing at the school. If they Google Oxford Martin School, they'll find all sorts of very interesting stuff going on there. I think just for people to just to lift their spirits and be more optimistic about the future, and to stop constantly looking on the dark side. I mean, bad things do happen and are happening and will happen, but on the whole, more and more good stuff is happening out there, and people should celebrate that and rejoice in it and feel better, I think, and less depressed about everything.
And for those of our listeners who are actually interested to find out more about yourself and your work, where would be the best place to start?
Probably my website, which is just andrewcrofts.com, and everything is on there. There's a short film about me and a few articles and some of the books that I'm allowed to talk about. So yeah.
I would actually publish again the short film underneath our interview so that people can watch it right there, without having to click anything. But of course, I would also post the links to your website. I would like to finish our interview with one of the, I think, most fundamental quotes from your book. And again, it's a quote from James Martin, where he says, "The fundamental question of our time is, will Homo sapiens survive? If it does survive, will it learn from its mistakes? If we understand this century and learn how to play its very complex game, our future will be magnificent. If we get it wrong, we may be at the start of a new type of dark age. Or worse, we may be extinguished."
Couldn't put it better myself. Perfect.
Well, you actually put it. And right on that topic, did you record your conversations with him, or how did you take those extensive quotes, both about his biography and during your time that you were there?
Yeah, I did. Yes, I record. I like to just have a tape recorder running the whole time, because then that leaves you free to just follow the conversation as it goes without constantly having to take notes. If you're constantly writing, it's very distracting and exhausting. But again, these days, another wonderful progress. A little MP3 player will just keep recording away in the background, and everyone forgets it's even there. So I spent a lot of time wandering around with that.
So you're getting more and more updated on technology. First with a simple MP3 player, then with Skype conversations and interviews, and who knows what's next?
Who knows?
Do we have an inkling on your next project?
Sorry?
Do we have an inkling on your next project, and is it related, or?
At the moment, I have a number of projects, and one of them is based in Africa, and there's some fiction as well that I'm doing, which which I hope is going to be turned into television soon. So it's very, very broad. Another of the reasons why it's wonderful to be a writer and a ghostwriter is the variety. That one minute you can be on a private island in Bermuda, and the next minute you can be down a dark alley somewhere talking to somebody very, very different. So it's a varied and fascinating life.
You know, I'll keep you here for another couple of minutes, because the quote that I just made was from towards the end of the book. But since you've mentioned your current projects and the fact that some of them can be going to TV soon, I wanted to ask you a little more about The Ghost, the Robert Harris book, which eventually became the backbone for Polanski's film with Pierce Brosnan and Ewan
McGregor.
Ewan McGregor, that's right. And especially since in the introduction of the book you have this very interesting quote, which I'd love to give here. And you say, "Of all the advantages that ghosting offers, one of the greatest must be the opportunity that you get to meet people of interest."
Yeah, it's perfect. Well, Robert Harris's book, as you say, which also the film and the book are very, very similar, because he was involved with the script with Roman Polanski.
So were you the prototype for the were you the prototype for the character in a way?
Who knows? Who knows, Nicola? But I know that Robert read the book, and he used a quote from my book. I've written a book called Ghostwriting, which is about how to be and hire a ghostwriter. And he quoted me at the beginning of each chapter. And as you say, that one you've read, that was the opening chapter, which sort of sums it up. But I think there were a lot of parallels which struck me because the book is set on an island where the ghostwriter is taken off to meet this ex-prime minister who's doing his memoirs, and the whole thing unfolds. And I was off at the same time as the film's coming out. I was off to Jim's Island, so the parallels did strike me. But actually, having read the Robert Harris book, I think he must have taken in quite a bit of what I've written in the book, because his portrayal of a ghostwriter's life is extremely accurate. He weaves it into a thriller, and my life isn't quite as terrifying as the plot is for Ewan McGregor as the ghost in film. But the mechanics of being a ghostwriter and the feel of it, and many of the things that he says, yes, are very similar to what I said in the book. So yeah, well, there you go. Yes, I think so, probably.
Well, Andrew Crofts, on that note, I would like to thank you once again for taking time to be with us today. And I would like to also wish you good luck with your ongoing projects. And maybe we'll see them on TV or on the big screen as they're unfolding. I would also like to thank very much to all of our listeners and viewers of Singularity One-on-One. I hope you guys all enjoyed listening to this interview as much as I enjoyed talking to Andrew. And you can go and listen to the interview in full or download it to singularityweblog.com. Thank you.
Thank you.